Season's greetings and a warm welcome to India's world. As 2018 approaches, we're looking ahead to some of the challenges for the government in international relations. And today we aren't going too far, focusing on our neighbours. What's the way forward with them? Joining me on the panel today, we've got Mr. Salman Haider, former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Vivek Katju, former MEA Secretary, and Mr. Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at the Vivek International Foundation. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me. Mr. Haider, starting with you, let's in fact start with what is obviously the bigger problem for India as far as neighbours are concerned, the Pakistan-China dynamic. How is that going to play out? How is that going to affect our relations also with the other neighbours?
Well, this is not a New Year gift that we are going to get. It's something we lived with for a long while, and it will continue. The relationship between Pakistan and China, which has aspects that leave us very uncomfortable. And we have tried to combat the effects of this nexus in international forums and through our bilateral ties with these countries. So it is a very active element in our foreign policy. It's not new, as I said. It's not something that is going to begin in 1918.
Yes.
It's been there for years. But we have to keep working away, trying to find solutions for the problems that assail us and which give us a lot of trouble. And to which it seems there is no early solution and there's no early end.
Is there a change in the strategy that we may see, Mr. Katju? Because we did see in 2017 the Doklam incident and how India, of course, dealt with it. And following then, of course, how China as well responded. Do we see a strategy on that sense? You know, you've got a hostility, of course, as far as relationships are concerned, but you've got to take it forward as well as far as trade and other issues are concerned. And will India get a bit more assertive? Is that a strategy we'll see?
In Doklam, we did well. We held our ground, and the Chinese behaved in a very un-Chinese-like way. And it turned out all right for us. The nexus between China and Pakistan, which Mr. Haider spoke of, I think is getting stronger. Till now, their relations with India and their relations with themselves were based on a shared hostility towards India. But now there is a more positive feature which has emerged in the China-Pakistan economic corridor. And whatever may be the lack of economic logic, as some people say, and as there are apprehensions growing in Pakistan, the fact is that it is a geostrategic project in many ways for China and for Pakistan, and therefore it will be taken forward. Given the fact that our major challenge to my mind is China, this new relationship makes Pakistan almost as a subset of our relationship with China. And in 2018 and in the years to come, we will have to think far more closely and far more deeply on how to handle China. The basic approach towards China that was devised in 1988 by Rajiv Gandhi, and which I think has been followed all through, was sound. In a sense, it was that we will maintain our positions on matters on which there is a major difference of opinion between China and us as the border, but we will also cooperate where we can. And I wonder whether space for this approach is now shrinking. And in this context, we'll also have to give very careful consideration to our ties with the United States, because it's part of a whole. You can't isolate the China relationship that we have and that we want to foster from the larger relationship that we will also need to develop with the Americans. And this is especially so under a president like Trump in America.
And talking about isolation, we can't see China in isolation just as itself or with Pakistan. It also bears a lot of burden, of course, at least for India, as far as the other neighbours are concerned as well. And we'll get into that in a bit. But just would like to get to know from you as well, do we see a change in strategy as far as the China-Pakistan relationship is concerned? How is India going to tackle it going ahead?
I think we'll have problems. See, this is the triangle. Let me first look at the India-Pakistan angle. Number one, there are three problems in that in the coming year. One is politics in both countries.
Yes.
Pakistan goes into election mode. It's already more or less entering election mode. Once their elections get over, we go into election mode. I don't see much political space for taking any kind of an initiative, for even some kind of a developing some kind of a modus vivendi to keep things quiet. Second, there is nothing positive happening. Anybody who gets taken in by this nonsensical news that the army chief has told the civilian government that you make policy and I'll follow it.
Yes.
It's a load of nonsense, right? Nothing positive is happening from the Pakistani side and also nothing positive from the Indian side. So there's no positive that will lead us to a better relationship. Third, there are a lot of negatives which have entered the relationship, which are only going to increase as we go along. I don't see them being arrested anymore. So I think the India-Pakistan relationship is going to remain fraught. On the India-China front, again, the policy which was made in 1988 might have been relevant for maybe a couple of decades, but that was a time when China was not the kind of behemoth which it has become today.
Yes.
It was a China which had an economy which was smaller than most of the European countries. Today, China is the second largest economy in the world. It is very aggressively putting up its footprints all around us. So there is bound to be a problem, and that old policy framework under which we have been operating, I would imagine really needs to have a relook. But along with it, I think the China factor becomes, and it's not necessary that the Chinese are doing what they are doing, keeping us in mind,
Yes.
or their policies are directed against us. They are doing what they want to do in terms of their power projection. But in our region, whether it's in Sri Lanka, it's in Bangladesh, it's in Maldives, it's in Nepal,
Yes.
Pakistan, the Chinese actions out there will start impinging on our security situation and on our strategic environment. That is something which we need to really try and balance out in one way or another. And that will be the trick for Indian foreign policy in the coming years.
Security and even economically as well, Mr. Katju.
I just wanted to make one comment. I largely agree with what Sushant has said, especially about the comment of the Pakistan army chief on saying the civilians can take the lead and
Yes.
with India, etc., and that he is not against an opening with India. But I do think that in Pakistan, we need to explore every opportunity, even if we are skeptical. And skepticism is good given our history. There have been reports of ongoing back channel, not back channel, really the NSA channel. Nothing has come out in the public domain, so one doesn't really know. But should this channel be operational, then the question which comes to my mind is that has something positive happened on this channel, because of which the army chief is also making these noises? As I said, I don't know.
And like we said, China, of course, pushing its might, not just, of course, with Pakistan as far as that friendship is concerned, but we've also mentioned about Maldives, we've mentioned about Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and even Myanmar for that matter, Nepal, of course. How do you see that developing? If we take, let's say, the Indian Ocean region, that in itself, how is India going to be trying to assert itself in that region?
But we have to be alert. Life is not going to become simpler for us because China is more assertive. It's where all these decades China has not been present, but now it is. And it is present in areas which are like our home waters, more or less, as to look at it in the nautical challenge that Chinese vessels are all over the Indian Ocean. There is even a base now in apart from Gwadar, there is this in Djibouti, that the Chinese footprint
Yes.
is that much more prominent than it has been. Now, if we take a rather clumsy view, what seems to me to be a clumsy view of developing, reacting in hostility,
Yes.
and trying to look at other like-minded countries to sort of group up and band together in a response, I think that we might strengthen negativity and feelings that don't necessarily serve us. Our interest in maintaining our quality, our supremacy is perhaps too strong a word, but certainly our presence, our
Yes.
effective presence in the Indian Ocean region and in the waters that surround our country has always been there. And the actions that we see from China and other countries emphasize the need for us to be there, to have our own independent approach, to have the capacity to look after ourselves and not be driven by others. We are a major country, and our strength is also growing. It's not only China's strength or
Yes.
some other country's strength. We are also there, becoming more prominent and more effective.
And when we talk about being more prominent, any projects that are coming up which seem exciting, which seem that it is going to help us in gain more trust of our neighbors, help in strengthening the ties. Let's say that land pact that we had with, of course, Bangladesh, is that going to help us in 2018? Do we see something more developed? There was also talk of a motorway agreement, of course, between some of the neighbors. Do we see things like that getting developed further, and perhaps that is going to strengthen relations?
I think connectivity holds the key. And this government, as the previous governments, paid a lot of emphasis to growing connectivity. The fact is that South Asia, if you take just South Asia, is a region which was interconnected. It was a whole. And now that geography is broken up. We have a problem to the west in developing connectivity because Pakistan is a barrier.
Yes.
And I don't see that barrier going away anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that we don't develop connectivity to
On
the
other
east.
side, yeah.
More than that, I think all through the last few decades, we've tried to give stakes to our neighbors in India's economic development. And as we proceed in 2018, I think we've got to give greater inducements so that the web of relationships that we have in the neighborhood are strengthened. I think that is an essential aspect, even while we make it plain to the neighbors that they need to be mindful of India's security concerns, because that is the bottom line for us. But one last thing that I think Mr. Haider put it very well, if I understood him correctly, that we'll have to now navigate our way through all this far more effectively.
Yes.
And in this, and maintain our independence. And there, I must say, I think that is the key, that India must retain its strategic autonomy and not be a blind follower of any group. That's not part of our tradition in any way. And that tradition has to be observed. And I'm happy then, therefore, that in the GA, while not making any statement, which I think was a clever thing to do, we did vote with the larger majority on a subject where we felt that the United States decision was not very wise. Now, I may have different views on the details and how we need to proceed on this, but seeing how the world was configured, I think we did the right thing.
All right. The Indo-Pacific region, you seem to not agree because of the Israel-Palestine equation.
I'm sitting in very distinguished company and I'm really putting my neck on the block. But it's a very nice term to use, strategic autonomy. But it's a very relative concept. There's nothing, it's not an absolute concept. And given the kind of problems we face and the kind of challenges we face, I think there are inherent limits to, I would love to be, extremely autonomous of everybody and every pull and pressure and do what I think serves my country's best interest. But there are Faustian bargains to be made. There are all sorts of things which happen in diplomacy, and I'm sitting with two of the most distinguished diplomats. So, but you know, so I would take the term strategic autonomy with a pinch of salt.
Okay.
Number one. Number two,
you are sitting with a guru and chela.
and both very distinguished. So that is one part of it. The other part of it is, I think, see, on the China front, we can't match them on checkbook diplomacy. We shouldn't even try to do that.
Yes.
But my basic problem is that, and it's a question in my mind, that what is it that despite India having engaged with its neighbors, say a country like Nepal, with which we have had a very, very robust kind of a developmental program. A lot of money has been spent out there. There is cultural and, you know, civilizational links.
And the next few years are going to be so much
things.
more crucial with those elections
yet,
that have, yeah.
You know, we hear voices of the sorts which we hear from Nepal, but the Chinese, there's not a peep out of anybody against the Chinese. How does that work? We see the same thing, say, in Maldives. If Maldives runs out of water, Indian ships have to go and give them drinking water. And yet, you have a president in Maldives who thinks he can cock a snook at India and get away with it. Why doesn't somebody do the same thing with the Chinese? So, is there something lacking in the way we practice our foreign policy? Are we in this competition to, try and project ourselves as the really nice guys who everybody can kick around? Or should we be somebody who people say, look, we shouldn't be crossing their path? That is something which more and more we see in our own region, and I have a bit of a problem with that.
But then there's one thing there's one way, of course, to be aggressive and to show your might by being aggressive, and there's one way to be responsible.
No, it does not mean, see, it's certainly not my case that I'm being a warmonger and I'm saying that we should bombard the place if they don't listen to us. But there is something missing. That, say, somebody like the president of Maldives thinks that, you know, he can treat us the way he's treating
Katju,
us.
you would like to respond to that?
Look, I can appreciate Sushant's frustration. Obviously, the smaller neighbors, we must respect their sovereignty, but as I said, and let me repeat this, they need to be mindful of our interests too. And in order to secure our interests, they should be aware that India will do what it needs to do. Now, if we haven't done that so far, then it should not mean that we should not do it in the future.
All right. Okay. Let's move on and just talk about, of course, the ASEAN meet, which will take place, of course, on the 25th of January. That is also another sector where, you know, India is trying to, of course, assert itself. How do you see that moving ahead, as far as that is concerned?
I must confess I don't have much of a focus on that. ASEAN, we have gradually come closer to ASEAN over the last few decades, and cooperation between ASEAN and ourselves is strengthening, is growing, has an economic focus. I don't see, I am subject to correction by people who know better, I don't see any kind of innovative, strategic thinking which compels a change of direction in policy so far as we are concerned. But I think basically we have a stable and a well-developed relationship with them. It wasn't always the case. We were kept away from ASEAN. They thought that we were sluggards, that our pattern of economic development would hold the whole region back because we are a large country and a strong country. But our way of running our affairs was not appreciated by the go-ahead and very sprightly policies followed by ASEAN. But I think that is leveled out. That's equalized, and we are now. There's no sort of ideological barrier about patterns of economic development.
Yes,
so
and
I would expect to see a strengthening.
And when you are economically a stronger country as well now,
Yes.
as far as the equations are concerned, that is also a sector where, China is, of course, trying to compete. China is going to get those markets. And that is also a sector where India should be focusing, in fact, and we perhaps will be seeing more of that.
Yes, there is an element of competition with the Chinese, but in East Asia, China is far ahead. What offers us a silver lining is that countries of Southeast Asia, say the ASEAN you mentioned, want to develop ties with India. They are forthcoming.
Yes.
If nothing else, they want a greater balance coming in between India and China in the region. And this is not only in economic areas, but also in security areas. Maritime security, for instance, defense arrangements, a greater cooperation in defense. And I do think that we now need to use our military diplomacy far more. That will not be aggressive, but it will indicate to ASEAN and to the wider region that India is now more forthcoming and is adopting the pattern of, I hesitate to use the word, great powers. What great powers do.
Yes.
We need to start thinking now that despite all the difficulties that we have at home and despite our untidy systems, we have not only the makings and not only the potential, but that we've arrived in close vicinity to great power status. And we must start behaving like that, shedding the diffidence of the past. It doesn't mean aggression.
Yes.
It means greater confidence in our dealings.
And that is perhaps what you were suggesting earlier, that this is perhaps the route we need to take. You know, if you want to behave like a country that's powerful, if you want to project that, you've got to project it on all levels, whether it's economic, strategic, even military for that matter.
Precisely.
Yes.
See, for example, you know, with the ASEAN, you know, we are going to have 10 heads of state coming for the Republic Day celebrations. Yes. It's a great initiative, very innovative. But what is it leading up to? What is the grand plan, grand design? I'm not entirely clear on that, but I wish we would have something like that. And then, while there would be an element of competition, and to the extent that we can try and keep the ASEAN together, is in itself will be, you know, a great accomplishment, considering how the Chinese are, you know, entering into the ASEAN and trying to pit one against the other with their checkbook diplomacy. So if we can do something about that, that would be great. I don't know whether we will be able to do something about that. But I think part of trying to at least behave like a great power is that you project your power in a way that the other side, you know, doesn't want to cross your path unnecessarily. So, for example, I don't see anybody, once the Chinese, for example, say that these are our core interests, there is nobody who will say that, okay, fine, to hell with you, we are going to go and, you know, set up a relationship with the Taiwanese and you can stuff it. But with us, for example, Mr. Katju was talking about the vote yesterday. One way or another, you can vote whichever way you want to vote, it doesn't matter, at least this resolution. But the fact of the matter is, while we stand on this, you know, this hoary principle, how many of those countries actually stand with us when it comes to our core interests, whether it is on Kashmir or any of the other issues? How many of them are willing to vote in our favor against the Pakistanis, for example, and we seem to be standing with us? Surely part of being, you know, projecting your power is to also expect some kind of a quid pro quo from many of these countries. So, and then whenever we are in trouble, for example, during the Kargil war, everybody else dished us. It was the Israelis who came and were providing, you know, the necessary materials to us.
Yes.
We have problems with the Pakistanis or somebody else. We ask the Americans to intercede on our behalf. Perhaps abstaining on this particular vote might have been a better idea. And then that strategic autonomy which Mr. Katju is talking about would actually be, you know, in practice that, look, there is some quid pro quo on these matters. But of course, the jury is going to be out on that. It's going to be debated.
I'm sure.
Perhaps my view is wrong.
But that is also how diplomacy works. You know, you've got relationships on a personal level, but on some levels, you've got to do the right thing as well to also be perceived, you know, of a certain kind of a country and a certain kind of a thinking as well. And I think that is the balance that I mean, diplomats have to, of course, do when they represent the country. But apart from that, Mr. Katju, very quickly, since I'm running short of time, 2018, any specific countries or region that we'll be focusing on that you think has a lot of hope? Because we do know China, Pakistan, we've established, of course, there's nothing much that can move ahead. I believe that NSG is something that we'll still be pursuing, although a lot of people have, of course, come of the opinion that perhaps we should let it aside for a while, because that is one way where China, of course, heckles us. But apart from that, anything else that you see is a,
I think Nepal will need far greater attention.
Yes, yes.
I also think that our focus on connectivity will increase, and hopefully our implementation record on projects and assistance programs, especially in the neighborhood, will receive greater attention.
Mr. Haider, any?
No, I entirely agree with Vivek. I think he's pointed to the most important issues before us. I think it is extremely important that where we have difficulty, as in our dealings with Pakistan and with China, we should not be critical alone. I mean, because we have to keep active, try and mitigate the problems, try and improve matters, especially with China. We have a very extensive relationship,
Yes.
huge economic interests on both sides, especially on our side. And with Pakistan, the old process that we have never really moved away from, of trying to find solutions to problems. I think these we have to persist with, and we can't just walk away from them.
All right. Mr. Sareen, very quickly.
I agree with, I think the last thing which Mr. Katju said about our implementation.
Yes.
I think that's a big lacuna in the way we do foreign policy. But other than that, I think our focus will have to be on the neighborhood. I'm not despondent about dealing with China, because I imagine China to be a sensible country. It's a normal country. We can deal with it. Pakistan, I would say neighborhood -1
Yes.
is where the focus should be. Bangladesh is going to be very important. Sri Lanka is important.
All right.
Bhutan and Nepal are very important.
Absolutely.
So all neighboring countries plus China, I think that is where our focus needs.
All right.
Also Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
Of course.
We didn't, of course,
talked
go
about
on that.
that.
But thankfully, on that front, India is doing well. So perhaps, that is something we'll discuss some other time, because that's all the time I have at the moment. We look forward to your feedback, though. So write into us at indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. That's it for the moment. Thank you.